Today I'm going to speak about a former Gambino associate. At one time, he was considered to be inside John Gotti's inner circle, a Luca Brasi, if you will. Nonetheless, he'd been living a double life, one being a very capable tough guy in the street, as well as an FBI informant. His name was Wilfred Johnson, but everyone called him Willie-Boy. Willie-Boy was raised in Canarsie, Brooklyn to an American Indian father and an Italian mother. His family would eventually settle in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn. From an early age, Willie-Boy became a street kid. His home life was far from ideal since his father had a drinking problem that often resulted to him being violent. So as a result of learned behavior, Willie-Boy naturally related to aggression. His early criminal career initially developed as a preteen, where he was stealing and fighting a lot. And it was during his teens, and while involved with various Brooklyn street gangs, that he met John Gotti. And their friendship would carry on for decades. At the time, Gotti was working his way into the good graces of the Fatico crew, which were Charlie and Danny Wagons. They had the original Bergen Hunt and Fish Club on Fulton and Rockaway Avenue in East New York. Charlie Wagons was a captain in the Gambino family. One of the things that plagued Willie-Boy early on, as it does most associates who are not full-blooded Italian, is that he was never able to be inducted. For the most part, he was into strong-arm work, debt collecting, gambling, and hijacking. And according to reports, in 1966, he was incarcerated for an armed robbery. That bid would be the turning point in his life. While incarcerated, Willie-Boy grew dissatisfied with John Gotti and Charlie Wagons. The reason being was that no one looked out for his wife and kids while he was away. The FBI caught wind of his resentment and approached him when he was released. It was at that moment that he agreed to become a confidential informant. So to the FBI, he was source BQ5558TE. The BQ was for Brooklyn, Queens, and the TE stood for Top Echelon. They also gave him a code name, Wahoo, due to his American Indian lineage. Throughout the years, there were numerous members of organized crime Willie-Boy gave information on, which I'll get into more later. But one of the first things he told the FBI was about John Gotti's hijacking exploits, specifically out of Kennedy Airport in Queens. As a result of his information, Gotti would wind up doing 3 years in federal prison. After his release, because Charlie Wagons had a loan sharking case, he put Gotti in charge of the crew, which meant that once a week, Gotti would travel to Manhattan to the Ravenite Social Club to meet with Neil Della Croce, who was the Gambino underboss. Aware of this information, Willie-Boy let the FBI know about these weekly meetings, which led to an increase in surveillance at the Ravenite. Gotti's big break to prove himself worthy of being inducted came when the nephew of Carlo Gambino was kidnapped and killed. Gambino ordered the murder of James McBratney, who he believed was responsible for Emmanuel Gambino's death. On May 22, 1973, Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, and Ralph Gallione caught McBratney in a Staten Island bar and killed him. Willie-Boy eventually caught wind that Gotti and Ruggiero was involved in the hit and notified the FBI. On June 3, 1974, Gotti was arrested in a Queens bar for the McBratney murder. Willie-Boy received a $600 payment for his information. After finishing his time for the McBratney murder in 1977, Gotti became officially inducted into the Gambino family. Naturally, the FBI found out thanks to Willie-Boy. In 1979, Willie-Boy would do a piece of work for Della Croce. At the time, Della Croce was indicted in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The case involved the murder of Charles Calise, a Yonkers bookmaker, whose body was found in the back seat of his Buick on July 7, 1974. Della Croce didn't want to sit next to his co-defendant and fellow Gambino member, Anthony Tony Plate Pilata, during a trial. He believed the jury would convict them based on Tony Plate's appearance. Meanwhile, Della Croce was more intimidated in the looks department. Della Croce had his lawyer try to get a severance, but the judge denied it, and Tony Plate's fate was sealed. Most likely, the hit was given to Charlie Wagons or Gotti, but Angelo Ruggiero and Willie-Boy were suspected of carrying the hit out. On August 13, 1979, Tony Plate met with his good friend Hyman Levine in Miami, and got into Levine's 1977 Lincoln Mark V. Consequently, Tony Plate, Levine, and the Lincoln were never seen again. Days later, the FBI spotted Ruggiero and Willie-Boy sporting dark tans. Although it was August, it still wasn't hard to figure out. Willie-Boy divulged to the FBI Gotti's bad gambling habit, and according to Willie-Boy, Gotti was losing so much money that he resorted to drug dealing. His brother, Ruggiero, and John Caniglia were heavily dealing in narcotics at this time. Nevertheless, Gotti believed in 6 degrees of separation to insulate himself from being associated with the drugs. As a result of the information provided by Willie-Boy, the investigation into the Gotti crew's drug dealing took shape. He even drew a diagram of the inside of Ruggiero's house so the agents could figure out where to place their bugs. And he told the FBI that Ruggiero told him that when he needed to talk, he would use his daughter's princess phone, so they bugged that as well. Eventually, Ruggiero, Gene Gotti, and John Caniglia and others would all be arrested for narcotics dealing. Those arrests would cause the Gotti crew major problems with Paul Castellano. And after hearing the crew complain about the problems that they had, Willie-Boy let the FBI know that his crew was in trouble with the Gambino boss. But there were things that Willie-Boy didn't divulge to the FBI, like Tony Plate's murder and the disappearance of Gotti's neighbor, John Favara, on July 28, 1980. Months earlier, on March 18, Favara accidentally hit Gotti's son, who was on a mini bike, and killed him. On the day he went missing, witnesses told the police they'd seen him abducted by his jaw by several men, one believed to be Willie-Boy. Favara was never seen alive again. In 1981, Willie-Boy was observed by 2 NYPD detectives meeting with Gambino member Arnold Scuteri in a parking lot near Kennedy Airport. They watched as Willie-Boy exchanged packages with a black guy and seen him place a paper bag in his trunk. After following Willie-Boy back to his house in Brooklyn, the detectives approached him and told him to open up his trunk. Inside the paper bag was $50,000, so they handcuffed him and took him in. At some point, Willie-Boy tried bribing the detectives and their lieutenant, and they were going to charge him with bribery. So to avoid going back to prison, he offered to give them information, and so started his time as a confidential informant for the NYPD as well as the FBI. Another murder he didn't tell the FBI about was the 1984 murder of John Sanamo, who was found hanging from a tree in Queens with a white sweater wrapped around his neck. Sanamo was a witness to a murder earlier that same year at the Silver Fox Bar in Queens that John Jr. Gotti was involved in. By March of 1985, Della Croce and 9 others, including Gotti and Willie-Boy, were indicted for federal racketeering. The Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, Diane Giacalone, had been investigating her target, Della Croce, and the Bergen Hunt and Fish crew for close to 5 years. At the time the indictment came down, Della Croce was diagnosed with cancer and receiving chemo in the hospital. He would die in December of that same year, making Gotti the prime defendant. During the initial hearings, Giacalone found out that Willie-Boy was a confidential informant and decided to expose him. Her strategy was to force him to take a plea and testify against Gotti. From the get-go, Willie-Boy made it known to the FBI that he would never testify. The FBI explained to him what Giacalone was up to, and Willie-Boy begged her not to expose him, stating, "They'll slaughter me and my family." She offered him witness protection, but he refused to testify. Shortly after, in open court, in an effort to have Willie-Boy remanded with no bail, Giacalone announced, "The reason is that Mr. Johnson has been an informant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation for a period of over 15 years, including a period up through the present time." Willie-Boy tried denying it. "Not true, Your Honor," but the cat was out of the bag. The judge subsequently remanded him, and he was taken to MCC. Not long after, Giacalone was eventually able to get Gotti remanded to the MCC as well. According to Sammy Gravano, Willie-Boy and John Gotti were on the same floor in MCC, but Willie-Boy was behind the glass, which is segregation. Gotti approached Willie-Boy one day and spoke to him through the plexiglass. He told him he was going to give him an oath on his dead son, that if he stayed strong and not cooperate, he guaranteed he wouldn't be killed, but he couldn't come around anymore. Basically, he was letting Willie-Boy know he was giving him a pass, and that his punishment would be getting chased, banned from coming around the crew. Gravano also stated, things came out that were peculiar. In the 302s, Willie-Boy never cooperated against anyone in the mafia except for John Gotti. He further stated, all the hits he did, all the illegal stuff he did, he never ratted on anybody. It was just John. I'm not sure if Gravano is possibly getting confused, or maybe he's unaware of the history regarding Willie-Boy's time as a confidential informant. With that said, Willie-Boy absolutely gave more guys up other than John Gotti. For example, the following is just some of the information Willie-Boy provided on other people. In 1978, he supplied the FBI with the location of Paulie Vario's headquarters at a scrapyard in Brooklyn. He also gave information about Tommy DeSimone's murder in 1979. At the time, DeSimone was a Lucchese associate whose murder was depicted in the movie Goodfellas. In 1981, he gave up the location of a dice game in Little Italy that resulted in the arrest of Frankie DeCicco and Tony Rotrampino. Also in 81, he gave the location where Bonanno captain Sonny Red Indelicato's body was buried. Indelicato was one of the 3 Bonanno captains killed in May of that same year. Allegedly, the Gotti crew participated in the removal and burial of the bodies, which Willie-Boy might have participated in or had knowledge of where they were buried, which turned out to be the hole in the Lindenwood section of Howard Beach, Queens. In addition, he supplied information about Alphonse Persico, the former acting Colombo boss, and son of Carmine Persico. I'd like to quickly mention the super thanks icon underneath this video for anyone who'd like to show support to this podcast, and I thank all in advance who use it. Willie-Boy refused to cooperate with the government and sat at the defense table the entire trial, and on March 13, 1987, which happened to be Friday the 13th, all of the defendants were acquitted. Afterwards, Gotti told a reporter, they'll be ready to frame us again in 2 weeks. Foolishly, Willie-Boy went back to his house in Brooklyn and thought all was forgotten. Years ago as a teenager, I met Willie-Boy at his house in Brooklyn. My uncle Mario was friends with him, and I believe he built a row of 3-story houses that Willie-Boy lived in. They were mother and daughter homes, and one of his daughters lived next door. My uncle, my cousin Louie, and I all went to Willie-Boy's house one afternoon. I didn't talk to him other than shaking his hand hello. At some point, we heard the ice cream truck outside. My cousin told me to take a walk. There were about 20 kids waiting in line for ice cream. Willie-Boy walked over to the driver and paid for everyone's ice cream, including the 20 other kids. About a year after the acquittal, the Colombo family put in a beef, which Gravano confirmed, stating that they wanted to know why it was taking so long to kill Willie-Boy. According to Gravano, Gotti assigned the hit to Eddie Lino and Sal Scala, and they gave the hit to Tommy Karate Patera to carry out. On August 12, 1988, at 6:05 a.m., Willie-Boy exited his house and was headed to work as an operating engineer. The 2 shooters, Tommy Karate and Vincent Kojak Giattino, approached him firing 19 times. Willie-Boy was hit with 10 of those bullets and most likely died before he hit the ground. Prior to making their getaway, the shooters dropped tire spikes on the ground to prevent any police chase. Definitely the planning of Tommy Karate. In 1992, Patera and Giattino were indicted for Willie-Boy's murder. Giattino was convicted and Patera was acquitted, but he would eventually be convicted of 6 additional murders.